You're listening to Hawk Talk. I'm here today with Rand Fishkin. How are you?
Good. How are you, Eric?
Good. Thanks for coming on. So, got to kick it off. I assume like you're in the delivery room, first day you get out and you're like, hey, listen, I could really help optimize the SEO of this hospital. If we can just have a conversation on the side, it just started right away, right?
Uh, yeah, that sounds accurate. I mean, I have no memory of that day, so your account could be as accurate as
Yeah.
anyone's.
Appreciate that. So, but let's take it back. Where are you from originally?
Seattle.
Oh,
Well,
yeah. Nice.
okay. Technically, I was born in New Jersey, rural New Jersey, but I moved here when
Okay.
I was 3 months old.
Nice. Got it.
And yeah, my parents kept an apartment in New York, which they sold just before it was worth anything
I'll hop on.
in the early 80s. So
Nice.
I spent a little bit of time living like on the Upper West Side as well. But,
Yeah. Got it. And what took your family out to Seattle?
my dad had the kind of job that does not exist anymore. He got his engineering degree driving a taxi cab in New York, and
Uh-huh.
then got hired by Boeing like the week after he graduated, or a couple weeks after he graduated, something like that, and then worked there for 30 years to the day. Got his
Nice.
pension and
Yep.
retired.
Yep. My
Yeah,
father-in-law, the exact same thing. He worked at Howard Hughes, that became Boeing, was there 30 years to the day, and now he
yeah.
still consults, but took his pension 30 years to the day.
It's really challenging to try and convince folks who've been through that experience that, dropping out of college and doing a startup and having this
Yeah,
very untethered career path is realistic. And
yeah.
I think even harder trying to convince them. I'm very lucky. I was born like right on the cusp of when you could still afford to work a minimum wage job and go to college, like pay for your own
Uh-huh.
college. But it's
Yep.
really tough to convince folks, in my parents' age group that that's not possible anymore. The cost of
Yeah.
tuition is, 100x
As they
what
say,
any
like, just
kid could
stop buying
possibly
avocado
make.
toast, right? That's how you fix
Yeah.
it. You don't buy the avocado toast, and then you can afford college.
Man, if you would just skip that latte in the morning, you could
Yeah.
totally afford college and a
Yeah,
house.
exactly. Yeah. It's um, nice. And so growing up, your dad was an engineer. Did your mom work as well?
Yeah, so she ran the company that eventually turned into my first startup,
Uh-huh.
Moz,
Oh, okay.
which yeah, so she started that business in 1981, basically doing small business marketing consultancy,
Wow.
like yellow page ads, letterhead,
Yeah.
logo, that kind of stuff. And
Awesome.
then when I dropped out of college in 2001, uh, I started basically building websites for her clients because her clients started asking for
And
websites. I love the internet. I thought that was really cool.
yeah.
I'd been building and designing sites in the late 90s as well.
Yeah.
And then that business did not go well at all. And we eventually we pivoted to SEO a couple of years later, I think
Got it.
2003.
Yeah.
And that's
And
what kicked that company into that position.
got it. And so growing up, were you always into computers, always into web design, or like how did that come to fruition? Like what were your sort of hobbies? What was the I want to be this when I grow up for you when you were like 6, 7 years old?
Let's see. I think it was a little bit later than that. It was probably like maybe I was 12 or 13, and there was a video game that I really wanted to play, but the computer that my parents had bought for me, or I guess had handed down to me, like it was an old 386
Uh-huh.
for folks who might remember the 86 series computers. Um, that machine did not have enough RAM to run the game,
Yeah.
but I had heard from a friend that you could fool the software that checks in the game that checks for the RAM if you wrote a batch and config file in a particular way. And so that was what I did. I sort of learned just the crappiest, MS DOS
Yep.
batch file editing programming, so that I could play this video game. And
Yeah.
I would say that was kind of the start of me getting interested in like
Yeah.
what's under the hood of computers and software and all that kind of stuff.
And so what did you go to college for? Like when and where did you go?
I went to the University of Washington, so been in
Uh-huh.
Seattle basically my whole life.
Yeah, yeah.
And I believe technically before I dropped out, I was closest to getting a degree in finance,
Okay.
although that was more by default than anything else. I think that
Yeah.
basically I had taken for whatever reason, I'd just taken the series of classes that put me closest to that one.
Got it. And was it like, tell me more about that decision. Like you went to college. Did you just go because that was the next step? And then you realized, wait, this isn't the next step and I'm out?
I mean, I think it was I would say, the sort of family background
Mhm.
stuff. So, my parents are Jewish, my grandparents are Jewish,
Yep.
all that kind of stuff. And Jewish Americans especially have this like big focus on education, how important
Yep.
it is. You get a degree, you become a doctor or a lawyer. Those are the only two professions that exist for our people. If you go into Hollywood, that's sort of frowned upon, even though
Yep.
there's lots of money. And but so yeah, I think I was just following the classic default path. But I have never. I'm not sure if this is nature or nurture, but I've never been a particularly good conformist.
Uh-huh.
So
And so
pretty
you were
much.
were you working with your mom on the side, and then you were like, oh, there's money coming in. All right, I don't need to do this college thing. I'm just going to do this. Got it.
Yeah, yeah. And I got in a fight with my dad, I think my junior year, and he stopped paying for college. And so I was
Mhm.
working a couple like minimum wage jobs near the university and
Yeah.
paying for my own classes. And then was like, I like this web design thing better. And I don't really want to go back to school. And I think I only had 7 credits or something to go, which would have been 2 classes, but they weren't offered the same quarter. So I would have had to go back to school for 2 more quarters, blah,
Yeah.
blah, whatever.
Cool. Got it. And so, as you said, it didn't work out. Why didn't it work out with the web design side? I'm curious. Like, what was the failure when you went back? You said you were building websites with your mom's consultancy, and a couple years in, it wasn't working, and that's what forced you to pivot.
Um, I mean, I would attribute it to all sorts of things. First off, we did not know the first thing about, I certainly didn't like running a business of any kind, just at
Yeah.
all. The basics of make more than you spend, of how do you do marketing, how do you get clients, how do you serve them well, how do you get referrals, all that kind of stuff. I think, my mom had done a good job as sort of a solo practitioner, building up a network of people who knew her, liked her, trusted her, and worked with her. But outside of that, like a kind of group of people who knew her from the past, there was just not a lot of opportunity. So, we did everything under the sun, like went to pitches and tried to fill out RFPs, which is any consultant who's ever done RFPs knows it's a nightmare and a boondoggle. And
Yep.
unless you're an agency built to serve RFPs, you should not try and compete with the ones who are.
Yep.
And we, tried to pay for events and set up booths at events, and maybe we could get people out. Like, none of it worked. In addition to which, I don't think I was a very good web designer. Like, seriously, I would put myself in the bottom third in terms of
Yep.
quality um, on that stuff. Like, I have passion and interest in the visual arts and in design, but not talent.
Got it.
And I probably
It's
could
good
have.
to come to terms with that. Like I have had the same thing many times. Where like that's just not my talent, including the visual arts. Like as funny as it is that I run a big marketing agency, I'm not a visual guy. I'm a numbers guy, a
Yeah.
data guy. I think we have other people here that are visual people, but like yeah, knowing your own skill set's super important.
Well, I found this too, Eric, right? You were mentioning to me just before we started that you've got a couple hundred people at the agency now,
Yeah.
that's a big agency, right? Like that's very sizable. Um, and I found once Moz got to 50 people and then,
Yeah.
scaled up to 100, 150, I think when I left it was 200 plus. I did not enjoy managing people and teams. That was not a
Yeah.
strength of mine. It wasn't a terrible weakness, but it was certainly not something that gave me energy. Right? Like
Yeah.
it did not bring
Yeah.
joy to my day when I looked at my calendar and said, "Oh, I have a bunch of meetings with whatever C-suite folks and then
Yeah.
VPs and their reports, and I'm going to try and figure out, what are the functions and dysfunctions in the org and
Yeah.
sort through those." Like, oh, God, kill
Yeah.
me, right? I just hated it, and so, I think the superpower is both knowing not just what you're good at, but what you're good at and enjoy doing. Like it brings
Yeah.
some joy and happiness to your professional life. Because I don't think
Yeah.
you can stick with, you mentioned how long have you been doing this? 20 years?
10.
No, 10 years. Yeah. So, you can't stick with something
Yeah.
for a decade. if you're hating every day, right?
Then
It's
you won't
just
produce. I mean, that's the part of it too, is like, even if you like can, bare knuckle it and just go, go through white knuckle, excuse me, and go through it, it's
yeah.
like you're still gonna that and somehow you have the grit to keep going. You're not gonna produce because you're gonna be trying to get away from it. That extra meeting at the end of the day that you should take, but you're beat up because you've been beat up all day, you're just not gonna do it. And that little incremental that doesn't make the difference between real success and failure, you won't be able to get through.
Well, and how are you going to ever compete with someone who loves doing that?
Exactly.
I don't think it's not a competitive advantage for you,
Yeah.
and therefore it's not the thing that you should lean into if you don't personally enjoy it. That's not to say, there's workarounds, right? Like
Yeah.
if you told me like, hey, Rand, speaking of, I really kind of hate managing people. Do you have any tips? Right? I'd
Yeah.
be like, hey, yes. You know what?
Yeah.
You can be the CEO of an org and manage very few people,
I'm
right?
one of
And
them.
basically be the face in the podcast
Yep.
interview and have like two or
Yep.
three people that you really trust in the org. They're the only ones that report to you, and they're responsible for all the whatever organizational design and building and all that kind of stuff. I didn't
Yep.
learn that until I left Moz. And
Yeah.
so, I think that was a big mistake on my part, right? But it's not
Yep.
realizing these workarounds and leaning into things that aren't your strength that'll doom you.
And talk to me about Moz in that sense, and I do want to circle back on that and why you left and all that. But in terms of like 2003, you really start getting into SEO. You built a brand that like even when I was getting into digital marketing, let's say 2009, 10, I already knew Moz and
Yeah.
heard about it throughout. Um, how did that kick off? Like when you get it, did you just rocket ship from 2003 on? Did you just go, oh, everyone needs SEO now? This is working. Like how was the path there?
I mean, so I think there is one accurate thing in your statement there. It's not that we rocket ship the whole time, but
Yeah.
the rising tide of everyone needed to do SEO for the next really 15 years, right? Because Google
Yeah.
became the primary traffic source on the internet, and they were sending out enormous amounts of traffic, and there was just
Yeah.
tremendous amount of opportunity in every single niche, and things started to get more and more competitive, probably post 2012,
Yeah.
2013. But even even after that, there was still incredible opportunity in SEO. Today, less true,
Yeah.
but at that time we were riding that rocket ship, and because we were one of the first brands to become sort of trustworthy and authoritative in the space, had a lot of knowledge, had a wonderful community of people, friends and colleagues that I'd built in the industry, and a passion for it, right? Like I had real passion and interest around SEO, which if
Yeah.
you go watch those old videos or something, you'll be like, dang, this guy's super excited about title tags. Like, what's going on, right? um,
And
and
what was it
uh,
about it?
and
I'm
and
curious.
that, sorry.
What was it about SEO that got you so excited? Like, why were you so into it?
Oh, you know what? I do think by nature I'm kind of an optimizer.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. So if I play a video game, I want to figure out the exact best combination of whatever skills and items that my character can get to make
Yeah.
every run or every battle or whatever it is, super super efficient. I love doing those kinds of things. I like, I don't know, optimizing a bookshelf. I like
Yeah.
optimizing my desktop computer to like run at peak performance. All that kind of stuff, right? I don't know why exactly, but um that's a match for me,
Yeah.
right? It just clicks. And so SEO was kind of that. I think the other thing too is I quickly fell in love with fighting Google. Um, so I think that I mentioned that I have this sort of, what you want to call it, counterculture, sort of,
Yeah.
don't trust the man. I was very into the Seattle grunge, like don't sell out, damn the man, all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And Google was this big behemoth who, in a lot of ways, was quite a positive player on the web, and I still give them a lot of credit, early Google especially credit for being a pretty positive player. But I hated the way they treated website owners, small and medium businesses especially. Back in the 03, 04, 05, probably all the way to like 2010 or 11, there was this attitude of anyone who does SEO is a spammer and they're trying to manipulate us and we're against them. And eventually that attitude actually changed, and Google
Yeah.
started working with those folks. They realized they were important to their ecosystem. They realized they could make money from them and off them. And so the economics dictated a change in policy.
Yeah.
But for those 10 years, there were not enough good people advocating for making search engine optimization a real practice that marketers could adopt and should adopt, that marketing departments and teams should hire people, that they should hire agencies like yours to help them do it, right? And so having this kind of, Moz was not independent, but it was not, it wasn't Google and it wasn't another agency, but we
Yeah.
haven't gotten to that
When you
part.
say it wasn't independent, what do you mean?
I mean, it wasn't independent in that it's, we had a for-profit motive,
Oh, yeah,
obviously,
got it. Yeah.
right? But we were an outsider to both agencies because we weren't competing against them, right? We
Yeah.
were one of the early software products starting in 2007 anyway.
Yeah.
And we had been on the side of agencies because we had been an agency, tiny little agency that didn't do particularly well, but and we weren't at Google, right?
Yeah.
So we were
Right.
like kind of outside of all three of these. And so a lot of people look to us as this authoritative thing. And then, as I started getting invitations to keynote events and people saw me on video, right? Those early like
Yep.
Whiteboard Fridays, which predated YouTube even a little bit.
Nice.
That became like a mark of authority in this space. Like, hey, you can trust these guys to tell you the real stuff. Not that they're never wrong. Sometimes they are, but when they are, they'll come out with another, blog post about how they were wrong and what's the correct thing to do now. They'll update their site and change the, recommendations. Like you can kind of trust the Moz folks to do the right thing for other SEOs. And I think that was, that really is what put us on a great path. And because we had the community of people who knew us, liked us, trusted us, selling a software product to them, right? A software subscription product was much less of a challenge than it would have been for someone without that presence.
Yeah. And by the way, did you work with your mom throughout the whole thing? Was she there through and through?
Let's see, kind of complex story there, Erik, but in 2007, when some venture capital folks kind of approached us and said like, hey, do you want to take this to the next level and take some money and, sort of add rocket fuel to this thing? I was very tempted. I said yes. I think my mom was a little more skeptical, but she went along with it. But the VCs insisted that I become CEO. And I think, she had long been the president, right? Sort of running this thing. She'd been running this business since 1981, technically, in one form or another. And so I think she was kind of like half proud of my son who is doing well. And gosh, it's, I think emotionally challenging to have this business that you built taking off and also taken from you.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
that was kind of an ugly, complicated time. And the next few years, she was still partially active in the business. And then when we raised our second round in 2012, she stepped down entirely. Yeah, and I think she stepped off the board of directors as well. So she and I both had voting seats on the board, and she ended up selling most of her shares in a 2012 or 2013 transaction, which was a great deal for her and sort of set up my folks. Was really nice. Yeah.
Awesome. And everything's good, I assume, at this point. Sorry to dive in. I usually don't, but you mentioned it. I'm curious.
Unfortunately, we don't have much of a relationship these days. I don't have it with either of my parents. And I wouldn't say it's because of the work stuff. My my parents have a pretty dysfunctional relationship. My dad's a very problematic guy.
You were mentioning having issues with them in college too.
Yeah, and that's tip of the iceberg stuff. But
got it.
Anyway, long story. We don't have to get into all of it, but I will just say that like I think family of choice is awesome, right? Getting to pick the people that you and I do have a very close relationship with my grandfather who's still alive at 95. He's turning 96 in January. We just went out to dinner with him last night to like a little bar around the corner from his apartment. And
that's great. Awesome. That's awesome. So So you back to the thing. So you raised money in 2007 to pivot into software. Was that kind of what was going on there?
So technically, we had started selling software at the beginning, end of '06, start of '07.
Yeah. And
We
what
had
was
built
that
these
software? Was it,
tools.
yeah, go for it. You were
We
just
built
going
these
for it.
software tool. Yeah, we built these tools for ourselves, like for our agency to use, which I'm sure
Yeah.
you have internal
Yeah.
tools that you use at your agency. And I was like, I love these tools. I want to share them with everybody. I want to put them on the blog. I was a very like share everything.
Yeah.
And Matt, our developer, um, said no. Like our servers will melt down. We won't be able to afford it. Like we can't open this up. So I was like, well, Matt, what if we put a PayPal, link in front of it, and so you had to PayPal us like $30 every month in order to get access to the tools? And he's like, all right, fine. He's a grumpy guy, but he built that kind of over the holiday break, and then we launched, I think, in February of '07. And by June of 2007, we were doing more in the PayPal subscriptions to the software than we were in consulting revenue. And we were like, oh crap, like,
Wow.
wait a minute, maybe we need to change our focus here, right? Because we're not even
Yeah.
that was not what we were trying to do. Um,
Yeah. How big was your team at
so
that point? How many people were you?
6 or 7.
Oh, wow. So it's still a very small team.
Yeah, really, really tiny. We just had the one programmer, Matt. I think we hired our second programmer, and then we had like 3 consultants or something, and
Yeah.
myself and my mom.
Nice. And so were you when you were building this, like, were you it sounds like it was more reactive because like if you went, 2003 to 2007, you've got 7 people. You weren't in like hyper growth. I've got to grow this giant consultancy. I've got to run through a wall. You were just like, we're doing work. I'm paying the bills. We're good. My mom's good. That was kind of how
I
it
mean,
sounds like you're looking at it.
yeah. So what had happened was, I think I mentioned this when we
Yeah.
chatted earlier, and obviously in Lost and Founder, but we were super deep in debt, really, really bad
Yeah.
situation, starting, yeah, right around '03. So for like 4 years, our debt was 50 grand, then 100, then $500,000, right? Because we couldn't,
Wow.
once you can't make the minimum payment on the debt,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's all over, right? Like
Yeah.
interest rates kill you. And,
Yeah.
it's like 20% compounded interest month over month. It's just
Yeah.
insane. Um, so we were in very dire straits, and we never told my dad that we had any of this debt because basically my mom feared that if he found out, he'd like divorce her and take her mom's house. And anyway,
Got it.
real real messed up family stuff. But so that time period was insanely stressful, and we were just trying to you know make enough to get going. I think we had 3 employees, just myself, my mom, and like one other person who rotated, depending on who they were, until maybe '05 or '06.
Yep.
Um, yeah, so it
Got it.
was bleh.
Yeah.
It was
No,
not everything's rolling, we're paying the bills, like
when
we're
it's so
scraping
important.
by.
But this is the point of, frankly, this podcast is like people think that it's just like you just got into SEO at the right place, right time. You grew up in Seattle with a middle class family, so it all came easy, and that's it. That you, of
Yeah.
course, you were set up. You were born on third base, and you're done. It's like that's not actually usually almost ever how it works, frankly.
Yeah,
Even
I
with
mean,
people, yeah,
so I do think the interesting part, Eric, is, I interviewed a lot of entrepreneurs over the years and worked with tons of them, and I will say the ones who um, hit home runs, like what VCs consider home runs,
yeah,
are unfortunately almost exclusively what you described there, right?
yeah.
Like not,
That's fair.
not born middle class and struggled with debt and that kind of stuff. Like really born on third base, right?
Yeah,
Bill Gates is a classic story, of course,
yeah.
here in
Bill Gates,
Seattle,
Steve
where it's
Jobs,
like,
Mark
yeah, just
Zuckerberg.
already one of the richest, most prominent families in the Seattle area, even
Yep,
before that happened. Mark Zuckerberg, obviously,
yep,
if you can,
yep.
if you're dropping out of Harvard and you have not, his parents were paying full ride, right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah, that was not a scholarship,
yeah. Exactly.
anything, right? And so, yeah, when you study the stats, you're like, gosh, almost every billionaire was born to
Yeah,
millionaires.
yeah.
That's
That's
that's a little
probably
frustrating.
yeah, I haven't looked at that stat. I guess I've measured it more as where millionaires come from, and I don't mean
Mhm.
1,000,000, I mean, probably decamillionaires would be a better way to put it. it
Yeah.
seems like that's where you get a lot of variance in where they come from. But yeah, that's probably true too. Is the billionaire level, you probably have to be like it's just such an absurd amount of money. You probably starting from scratch to get there is probably near
Yeah.
impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these journeys are complex, and also I'd say, right, the fact that, you know, going back to the Moz story, like, okay, let's say, things, whatever, didn't work out. I could have still moved back in with my parents, right, who had a
Yeah,
nice house.
yeah, yeah,
I could have, I would have been not happy, not in
yeah,
a good
yeah,
place, real messed
yeah,
up, right? But I would have been okay. Whereas, a lot of the entrepreneurs that I know who don't have those kinds of,
yeah,
fundamental support networks, right? Don't have a, hey, my dad's an engineer and he like built up a nest egg and whatever,
yeah,
there's nothing, right? Like
yeah.
there is no
That's
safety net. And so this is all
it.
they've got. And
Yep.
oof,
Yeah,
way harder.
taking the risk that you need to take to build it. Like, that is where you end up with moderate growth because, like, I can't go bet the farm on this next step. It's those things that end up happening.
I mean,
Um,
I think about all the talent out there, just there must be millions of incredible entrepreneurs 10 times better than me
yeah,
who didn't have the opportunity because they they were not born into the circumstances, right? They didn't have the freedom to be like, well, I think I'll drop out of college and build some websites now,
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yep. No, it's always good to remember that. At the same time, thankfully, through this podcast, I think we're at like 120 interviews so far. You find
Yeah.
out that the path is really inconsistent, that it actually is to get to some level of success. Again, the billionaire number I haven't looked into as much, but definitely from the decamillionaire number, it is no matter where you come from, that is achievable.
Yeah.
It's just going for it. And I'd say probably, I don't know, I haven't done again the numbers, but I'd say half the people on this podcast didn't necessarily come from anything significant and
Yeah.
were able to turn something big from it. So getting back
Yeah.
into it. So
I always worry about this. Like, I don't know. I'd be curious to know, Eric, what your sense is of how honest do you think people are when you're like, "Hey, what kind of
sure.
situation did you come from?" Right? And I think there's a strong pressure. Like even I feel this pressure to downplay my whatever parents, you know,
Yeah.
rough wealth, right? But like, for example, I talk about like, hey, we were in debt, we had all these challenges, but remember, my parents owned their house. I mean, they were paying a
Yeah.
mortgage on it, so they didn't own it outright. But they also bought my grandmother's house in Connecticut.
Yeah.
Granted, real estate was way cheaper and all that kind of stuff,
For
right?
sure.
But they were paying 2 mortgages and they had the money to do that.
Yeah.
That's like, you know, that's
Well,
a
we live
lot
in a
more
world
money than
also.
most Americans have.
Yeah, and we live in a world that right now that I think everybody wants to down talk it and like take away because what I see is, and this happens to me, so I'm pretty open about the fact my dad was very successful. So I came from a successful family. I went and did my own thing. My dad used to like tell me at 8 years old, "You get nothing; it's going to the dog." Like he was so concerned I'd be a spoiled rich kid. He went the opposite direction. So in
Yeah.
a good way, it put a chip on my shoulder to go do my own thing. And what that did, my business partner reminds me, who didn't come from any of this, reminds me all the time, like, what that did for me was kinda what you're alluding to. It gave me a high appetite for risk because I wasn't ever worried about being homeless, but it wasn't what paid my bills to this point. And so,
Yeah.
I'm really open about it. What that's turned into, though, and you have to have enough sort of self-esteem to get over it, there's articles and rumors and talk all the time about how my dad just paid for me to start this company and just gives me money and all that stuff, and it's like, that's actually not what happened at all. But at the same time, it's like, but do I really care that that's what people are talking about? And a lot of people do.
Yeah.
For me, unless that's hurting my business in some way, it's like, sure, believe what you want to
No,
believe. At the end of the
I
day,
don't think I think that's I don't know how to put this, right? There's like
there's
I
an
remember
incentive.
Jerry Colonna, who I worked with for a little
Yep.
while. I don't know if you know him, but he sort of he's a mentor and coach and sort of, I don't know, pseudo therapist to a lot
Mhm.
of very accomplished entrepreneurs, especially in the venture capital space, or at least he was for many years. And he had this attitude of like, hey, everybody deserves empathy. I
Mhm.
remember talking to him like, gosh, you work with a bunch of really underprivileged, like folks who desperately need your time and you can make a huge difference for them. Why are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Like this was at the time when Moz was, tens of millions of dollars of revenue and like growing fast. And I was like,
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm learning a ton. And he's like, everybody deserves that empathy. Like,
Yeah.
Eric, it probably does not suck to come from wealth in
No.
the same way that it sucks to come from poverty, but that doesn't mean all your problems are solved. That doesn't mean that your happiness is guaranteed. That doesn't mean that your
Not at
family is
all.
functional and that
No, I think actually,
everything's good. I'm not
if you look at
criticizing
the
your dad's
stats,
decision. Like maybe it was a good one, but
no, yeah,
yeah,
and it sound if you look at the stats, I think most people that come from wealth are not happy because I think there's a high bar to create your own happiness. You're kind of when I think about this with my own daughter now, where it's like if we're gonna go take her all over the world to travel the world and do all these cool things, like then what's left for her to accomplish or her to experience or her like again, we're a people of purpose, and if you kind of give that person that everything's already been done, then what am I doing? And I think you deal with that in an indirect way. You also have the direct problems of like parents that just like that have money that just pay for everything for their kids and cover every problem, and then the kid doesn't even know what they're going to do. I see a lot of that in LA, but you have the other
sure.
problem where it's like even I have a little bit of this. My dad had a lot of success, and it was like even when I started, thankfully this took off. I built my own business, had my own success, but it was like almost that competitive nature of like, well, how am I going to create a life for myself that isn't frankly already created there? Like, not again, world's smallest violin from the poverty standpoint, and I get it. But from a happiness standpoint, as you said, everyone deserves empathy. You can't really take that away that like, happiness is expectations versus reality. And if
Right.
your expectations have been set so high because of where you were born, it is really hard to create a reality that meets there. Like it's that I think that is something that again nobody's going to feel bad about just because of the nature of our culture, but it's a truth when you're talking about successful people's happiness.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know that feel bad is the thing that I'm looking for, but
Totally.
I think that human connections, real powerful human connections and friendships are built on vulnerability.
Yeah.
Being able to say like this hard thing that happened to me. Hey, here's this hard thing that's happened to you.
Yeah.
Here's where your life is at, here's where mine's at, and like we share something, right? We share that bond even across whatever, income levels or wealth
Yeah.
disparity levels or whatever. Like we have friends who are, to your point, much wealthier than us, right? Like in
Yes.
the hundreds of millions,
Yeah.
or like maybe a friend or two who are in the billionaire club.
Yeah.
But um, and this is no offense to them, but I don't I think our life is happier, like
Yeah.
substantially, right? I don't think, once you
Yeah.
get a few $1 million in the bank and you are sort of secure, right? Like I'm
Yes.
not worried about like my house going away. I don't have to stress about next month's mortgage payment.
Yeah.
Then the search for purpose goes to other places. And if you find
Yeah.
that purpose and that happiness and you build a network of people that you love and care about and that family of choice, oh my God, life is so wonderful. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people who have wealth, have come from wealth, have built their own wealth, came from
Yeah.
nothing and built their own wealth. Like very difficult.
Yeah,
Uh,
there was a great interview with, Logic, the rapper,
yeah.
about when he got, his first record deal check, I think was $30 million, and he got 30 million check, boom, here, and he said it was the most depressed, anxious he had ever been in his life
Oh, wow.
because the idea of managing that money and what not to lose it, he went protectionist, like, he came from nothing. His I think his mom was a prostitute and his dad was a crackhead, as he put it, like, actually, and so, like, it was not an on purpose pregnancy. That's his upbringing was like, and so all of a sudden he makes $30 million. And again, the guy's a very eloquent guy. He talks a lot about mental health, all these things. And he gets 30 million and he goes to I love this line because he goes to his therapist and he's telling her, like, I've never been more depressed. Like, I'm scared. I don't want to lose this money. What do I do now? And she goes, apparently it's another high level person that treats a lot of billionaires. She goes, you know what every billionaire says to me at one point in our sessions? He's like, what's that? He goes, if only I had another billion. So like there's no point externally that people are naturally satisfied. And so you mentioned it's a few million for you, and that's because of probably a lot of work and reflection. Because most people, you make that first few, then you start your spending catches up, or your aspirations, or your expectations. By the way, when you're building a tens of millions of dollars company and it's growing every year, you expect that that goes forever too. And so it's really interesting. Again, it's all about expectations for reality. Expectations are you're just going to make more money next year, next year, next year. When that doesn't happen, it can be devastating. And again, we're not
Devastating.
talking about rational thought here. We're talking about emotions and purpose and feeling and the things that make us human that come into all this, that it's always really fascinating to see that. Again, I don't think, back to the empathy thing, most people care to have empathy for. So like, that's nice, but I still have to pay my mortgage,
And
which is
I
fair.
think that it's a completely fair thing. And also, uh, especially for folks who might be on a journey to where their business could be successful, right? Or it might get them to a place. If you tie your self-worth and your happiness to, am I always growing? Am I always making more?
Yep.
Am I, to your point, right? Like,
Yep.
I'm a billionaire, but if I only had another billion,
Yeah.
um, then uh, there will be no happiness for you,
Yep.
right? Like you will one day own a social network and offer $1 billion to Jimmy Wales to change the name of Wikipedia to Dickipedia, and the world will think you're a joke, right? They'll
Yep.
know you're a joke, and that
Yeah.
that is a
A
real
joke with a
thing
lot of
that
money, but a
happens.
joke.
So
And that's the thing I think people have to realize, you're not happy. That's like,
no,
at the end of the day, would you rather be happy with less money or unhappy with infinite money? I promise it's happy with less money.
yes, if you can find that way. That is not to say, right? There is a level, right? If you can,
Yeah.
I think the wonderful thing about there's a lot of tremendously shitty things about capitalism, right?
Yep.
Especially right now. But I think the one really truly wonderful thing is the freedom to put your labor where you want and to decide, hey, I want to invest a ton of time and attention and energy into this thing because I want to see it in the world and I want it to be successful. And I want that to be what I base my happiness off of, not whether it maximizes my total earnings potential. For
Yep.
almost every person in tech startup world,
Yep.
and entrepreneurial world, you should go be a mid-level manager at Google, Apple, Microsoft,
Yeah.
Amazon. You will make way more,
Yep.
right? Like, so my salary at Moz, I remember the day, 2007, we get funding,
Yeah.
and my salary goes from 30,000 or like $29,000 a year to $120,000.
Yep.
This is 2007, and I'm like, oh my God, like one paycheck is suddenly a whole
Yep.
quarter of earnings, and it's
Yep.
just incredible. I remember I took that first paycheck, put it in the bank, walked down to this fancy kitchen store, and bought myself a Maviel pan that I
Yep.
still use. I still like cook my
Nice.
salmon in it,
Yep.
and
That's great.
it was like $200, right, for this
Yep.
fancy French pan, and it's this like that experience is real, right? It's
Yep.
awesome to be able to have that transformative thing. But so at Moz, my salary was never more than $200,000 a
Yep.
year. Even I was whatever CEO, and then I stepped down as
Yep.
CEO in 2014, um, but stayed at the company for a few more years. So I was $200,000 a year is a lot of money.
Yep.
It's very good. And also, all my buddies at Amazon were like, I'm making 300 grand and my bonus this year was 180. I'm
Yep.
like, oh man,
Yep.
like, and you're a software engineer too, right? Like,
Right,
not, you're
exactly.
not
Yeah.
very
Not
high up in the
CEO. Yeah.
org,
Yep. No, it's the
right?
same
And
thing.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, we're 10
So
years in Alec Media. My partner and I still pay ourselves 120. Like, that's our salary. We're pretty open about it. It's
yeah,
like, yeah, we keep it in the business. Like, we have the decision to make a different decision, but when you're trying to build something, it's not. You're right, and I think that is a fallacy. I don't know what the expected value of a CEO is, but it's definitely less than working at Amazon or Google.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Well, especially, the venture-backed startup world, the 5-year survival rate sits just under 20%.
yeah, and that's
Um,
once you get venture backed.
That's once you get venture backed.
Yeah.
Then think about all the companies that failed on the, couldn't raise money, shut
Yep.
down, all that kind of thing.
Yep.
And then, if you look at, so a services business, agency business, interestingly, the 5-year survival rate is quite high. It
Oh, I
is,
would
I
agree.
believe it's over 65% according to the SBA.
Well, because with service businesses, I'm of the belief that you shouldn't raise debt. That you need to actually make adjustments and never take on debt. We haven't. We've 10 years in. We've bootstrapped it. Build a nest egg that can cover you, so you don't need debt.
So
And
you're saying that $500,000 in debt that I had in
yeah, exactly.
2006
Like, you have to stay
that was
afloat.
not the way to go?
And then if you have to ebb and flow, you ebb and flow. And what that means is the only reason an agency would fail is the owner gives up. Because if you're not underwater, if you don't have a funding or debt that you have to get over, God forbid you shrink to just you, it still exists. But like
It's
that,
true. That's true.
that's the way that I think, yeah, service
I mean,
businesses
this
have
has
that.
been, I think since 2008, this has been the year when I've seen the most services businesses shut down, at least in
Yeah.
marketing
Well,
universe.
we do a lot of M&A. We've bought 12 agencies, and what we see is just people are burnt. Like there's something weird the past 3 years between COVID and work remote. And I think I just talked to a guy named John Levy
Hmm.
that is one of the biggest students of human connection. There's a bunch of New York Times articles about him. He wrote a book about it called You're Invited. He hosts these dinners, all these powerful people. And there's a lot of studies now coming out that your cortisol levels obviously raised during work hours. Like you're working, you're stressed. There's a natural stress. I don't mean an unusual stress, just normal work stress. And being around people brings your cortisol down. Social dynamics, water cooler talk, all that brings it down. You get rid of that. There's a 30% increase in anxiety the past 3 years over
Oh
traditional.
yeah.
30% in society.
Yeah.
30% more people are saying that they're regularly anxious. And I believe it is that simple of a cause. It's that in social media. I mean, I hate to say it, but like I don't
Oh
hate to
yeah.
say
Yeah.
it. Like being pinged all the time with every global problem all the time and expected to chime in on it and be a part of it and da da da. Like it's like that combined with no human connection and just sitting at your house all the time. And yeah, creates a really tough environment to build. And so back to your point about agencies failing, again, it's when the founder gives up. I think a lot of people are giving up on careers, on work, on success because the stress, you know, it's, I actually didn't have any anxiety till last year. Like I first time I ever felt anxious, which is a whole nother story when,
Oh
realized how lucky I was for 35 years of my life.
yeah.
But when I finally had like a real anxious episode, not an anxiety attack, but like just like felt real anxiety. I didn't know what it was, but I know it's like the most painful thing I've ever experienced in my life. Like it was like this is awful. I could the idea of like not being able to eat, not being able to sleep, all those kind of things that I've heard and all the time. Finally experienced that. I've broken many bones. I've had many other types of physical injuries. Nothing compares. Like
Yeah.
it is, and so that's why I think people will do anything they can to avoid that feeling. And if that means giving up your business so you can just take a breath and not deal with that anxiety, if that's what's causing the anxiety, I think that's where you see that. 2008, obviously, very anxious, stressful time for people. Things were collapsing back to the point of expecting growth every year. And all of a sudden it
Right.
goes
Right.
boom. Same thing has happened the past 2 years. And
Yeah.
and this is where back to the grit, white knuckling through it. Some people can do that. Some people can't. And I think the people that can are the ones that are optimistic and telling themselves there's a light at the end of the tunnel at some point. But some people just, they hang on for as long as they can, just go, I'm done. Like that's it. I think that is a big part of what you just alluded to right now.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there's, so
Yeah.
I think I would love to pivot our conversation to SparkToro
Yeah.
because, I'll fill you in on that. Right. So very brief version of what happens between
Yeah. I want
venture
to let's
funding for
discuss. Yeah.
Moz
Yeah.
and the end of Moz.
Yeah.
So Moz raises $1.1 million in 2007.
Yeah.
It grows 100% year over year, uninterrupted for like 8 years.
Yeah.
Raises another round in 2012
Uh-huh.
from a very prestigious VC firm, and all sorts of it was like $18 million, right? So now we're kind of off to the races. How do we build $1 billion company? How do we get to 100 million in revenue?
Yep.
And growth starts plateauing in 2013. I think we
Yep.
grew only 50% that year, from like 29 million to 40 or something like that,
Yep.
right? So we're uh, things are not bad, right? Like
Yeah.
especially because Moz is an extremely high margin business, right? So
Yeah.
different from agency world, right? The margins on Moz's software business were like 85%,
Yeah.
which is just nuts. So all the costs are just people costs, and of
Yeah.
course, the venture capital mindset is like grow as fast as you can, like pour more money into
Yep.
acquisition, pour more money into everything. So we just try and do everything. We're like, okay, maybe SEO isn't growing fast enough. Let's invest in all these other things. We're going to invest in like email marketing and content marketing and social media marketing and PR and da da da. We're going to serve all these marketing professionals, and we're going to be a one-stop shop for this stuff. One-stop shop software businesses, by the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but they have not done well if you try to go from
Yeah.
sector to sector. And simultaneously, several of Moz's competitors realize, like, wait, if we just focus on this SEO space, which is growing like crazy, we can take the market out from under them. So 2012, Moz was the market leader by a long shot. And by 2018, 2019, it was number 3 behind 2 other Ahrefs and SEMrush. SEMrush went public, right? And had sort of the success story that Moz's investors would have wanted for it. And that was, that really sucked. So I, in 2013, to your point around like anxiety, I had not just anxiety, but like a severe bout with depression. I stepped down from the CEO role in 2014 and promoted my longtime chief operating officer to the role. And she became CEO. And then, tensions between us, even though we had a long, long friendship, flared up. And over the next few years, we sort of had a break in that relationship. And I left before I was kicked out at the start of 2018. And started SparkToro the next day.
Wow.
So took almost 8 hours off.
Even with all that stress and everything from that, you were like, I don't need a break. I just need to move into the next thing.
I think that was how I got rid of the stress, was to get the next thing going right away. And it was, I will say, like a huge motivation for me to immediately start my own thing and not take any of the other somewhat interesting offers that had started coming my way. Was I wanted to prove myself, right? I wanted to prove that Moz was not a fluke, that I could do it again, that my board had made the wrong decision by backing the wrong horse, and that I knew what was what in the software world, especially for marketers. There's that famous scene from The Simpsons where Homer's asked his motivation, and his brain's like, don't say revenge. Don't say revenge. Revenge? So then basically left the company and assumed that it was going to be worth nothing, right? Like it was not shrinking, but Moz was not growing. Like, I think growth had dipped into single digits. It had done some acquisitions about this company called Stat up in Vancouver, and that added a bunch of revenue technically to it. So I think it was doing north of 50, 55 now, but just wasn't going to get to the 100 million plus mark. And we were like, this thing's done. So I had my severance, but we had our mortgage to pay. We didn't have a lot of savings. We had a few $100,000 in savings. So I couldn't start SparkToro myself, and I never wanted to raise venture again. I think venture was essentially the second round, like, biased Moz to make poor decisions for our customers, for ourselves, for our team and employees, for founders, like everybody. And so instead, I raised money from folks like you, like a lot of agency owners and folks in the marketing space. 35, 36 of them put between $25,000 and $100,000 into SparkToro. We raised 1.3 million, and we raised it on very interesting terms. So you mentioned your salary cap that you and your co-founder have. So Casey and I, my co-founder at SparkToro, he and I have our salaries capped. I think it was at the Seattle software engineer average, which was around $130,000, until we paid back our investors their 1.3 million, at which point we could bring that up to twice the Seattle average. And then the only way we make more money is when we pay dividends. And so everybody owns units of shares in an LLC, which makes taxes a little more complicated, but it also means that we all profit share. And SparkToro is well on its way to making, so we repaid our investors this last June. So essentially about 4.5 years after they funded the business, 4.5, 5 years. And then, now the hope is every year or two, we get to send them a few tens of thousands of dollars, and they can make money that way. And this is the goal is, let's get them 5x, 10x their investment return, but let's do it in a way that's much lower risk and much more likely to, hey, this company is going to exist profitably for a long time. We also intentionally decided that growth was not our focus. Right? Our focus is on profitability and what we call chill work. Like Casey needs to be there for his daughters. He's the kind of primary caretaker while his wife has like a job where she's out of the house all day, every day. And Amanda, who's our VP marketing, like she's got a very busy life otherwise. I run another company. We haven't talked about it, but
Yeah.
I run an indie video game studio as well. So
Okay.
like we all have other stuff that we're doing. SparkToro is like a 30-hour a week is what we
Yeah.
aim for.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
and
awesome. I
that,
just had the founder of Basecamp on here too, the CTO,
yeah, yeah,
and David, he was talking about the same thing where like they never worked over 40 hours a week. That was one of their rules. He's like, if we can't do it in 40 hours a week, we're moving to the next week. Like, so the guy has raced Le Mans and is like a top race car driver as
huh.
well, while building one of the big tech companies. Like, it's pretty cool. They've done very well, but they've stayed bootstrapped and just like we're just going to be profitable and run it. And it's worked out for a long time for them because of that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that this is what I would say about that whole finding happiness, finding balance, finding the thing that gets you there. If you design your business and your life in such a way that fits with who you are and what you want to accomplish, as opposed to sort of taking on assumption that the thing you're supposed to do is grow fast at all costs and try and build the biggest business you possibly can and grow every quarter and make
Yeah.
sure that last year was or next year is bigger than last year. And
Yep.
if if you instead say, hey, our goal is stay profitable for a long period of time, give ourselves the life that we want to live, make sure that we pay ourselves and our employees enough, make our customers happy, that set of requirements is so much less stress than the venture mindset. And I'm saying mindset rather than
Yep.
asset class because a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of technologists, a lot of startup folks, a lot of folks at agencies, they think they're supposed to grow hockey stick.
Yep.
And that bias, I think, is poisonous.
Yep. I agree. And it's a weird environment we've created for ourselves in that way. But a couple more questions for you. Number one, what's next? What do you've got this building? Is it just now you found it, you're in your happy zone? I see a big smile. So
Yeah. No, so I mean, look, SparkToro has had its challenges, especially this year. So SparkToro was built, we haven't talked about what it is. It's an audience research software product, but it was built initially on Twitter as the base network. And
got it.
obviously Elon
Yep.
has sort of destroyed that.
Yep.
And so in two ways, right? Both from the data perspective, but
Yep.
also from the quality of use of
Yep.
that network is no longer particularly useful to marketers. And so we essentially had to rebuild the entire product this year. And so the year, I think we're going to end 20% down from where we were in March,
Yep.
which is fine. Like we're still
Yeah,
quite
it's
profitable, so it's not a big deal. But we had to rebuild the whole product, and we're going to launch that soon. So that's kind of the big next thing, and we'll see if this
yep.
new
And
launch goes
real quick
well.
question there, because you've gone through it before. And was the mental game of like dealing with a little bit of a decline a lot better this time around, where you're just like, I've been through this, it's fine, not a big deal, we'll fix it?
It was better, but it was not.
No. Yeah.
It
At
was
this point.
not fully. I had that tight chest feeling,
Yep.
the can't sleep, can't eat thing,
Yep.
right? All the anxiety stuff. It was there, but because I was familiar with it, because I felt secure in it, I think the biggest fear that I had was I didn't know how far and how fast we would um, shrink or our growth rate would shrink while we were rebuilding the product. And I wasn't sure whether we could find the right data sources to build the next thing.
Yeah.
So that caused quite a bit of stress. Casey and I kind of bounced off each other, stressed, especially the first 6 months of the year. And then things got much better as we were like, oh, we found it. This is the thing. This is working, right? We started playing with it. And I think what's interesting is I looked at the product that was being developed in like June, July and said, this is going to work. And
Yeah.
since then, I've sort of had this like confidence of whatever happens with SparkToro between that time and launch is whatever. Fine.
Yeah. You got to. That's a good way to deal with it. And so, last question for you: for someone trying to pursue their dreams, be successful, you've given a lot of advice here, but I wanted to kind of hone it in on what would be the one thing you either wish you heard or did hear that helped you keep going and get to that point and build what you've built.
I mean, I think that, the biggest thing that we've sort of focused on in this conversation and the way I'd frame that takeaway is you don't have to subscribe to someone else's definition of success, whether
Yep.
that's financial, whether it's how hard you work or what you work on or what you do or don't do to change your industry or those kinds of things. I mean, I think that the biggest thing I wish I could go back and tell my 20 something, 30 something self is don't fall into the trap of pursuing someone else's definition of success. Like, you define it for yourself. You define the life and the world and the business and all the things that are going to bring you joy and engagement and like fulfillment, real fulfillment. I
Yep.
worked on this today. I love working on that. Like, that's so fun. I love doing that thing. That thing's just so great for me. And however successful it is fine. As long as it's sort of base level enough, the rest is gravy.
Intrinsic value of doing the work. I agree.
Yeah. So it's so hard to convince. I think especially, people who have a lot of motivation and they've set high goals for themselves, they have high standards for themselves. I think it's really tough to refocus that from a how much money did I make or how many people did I add to my team, or sort of these
Yep.
artificial metrics versus like, did I do the thing that brings me joy and happiness for most of the day? And then I also had to do,
Yeah, it's part of
I
it.
hate doing, accounting and taxes stuff like
Yep.
that. Drives me
Yeah,
bananas. But
but
yeah.
you got to do it. Exactly. I think that's also important to highlight. Is like there's going to be a part of every job that you don't like. It's just part of it.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Rand, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for coming on Hawk Talk.
Yeah, Eric, I really enjoyed meeting you and learning more about your journey too.
Hey, we will talk soon.
All right. Look
All
forward to
right.
it.